This is the YOB ConvoCast, one-on-one conversations with your other brother's authors, community members, supporters, and friends.
What's up, friends, and welcome back to the YOB ConvoCast, conversations with beloved humans in our community. And this is a really special episode because I have made a nostalgic trip back to the city of Oaks. I have not been in the city of Oaks of Raleigh, North Carolina since before a pandemic ravaged the world. And it's so nostalgic being back. But here's the twist. I am not here talking with Ryan, who's been on 50 some Yobcasts and quite a few ConvoCasts. No. Ryan, we don't have time for Ryan today. We have another amazing person who's been on this ConvoCast before. He talked about being an Enneagram 1 last summer, and he's here to talk about something else today. It's Jesse. What's up, Jesse?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for coming all the way out here. Yes, I am not Ryan.
All the listeners perked up. They're like, oh my gosh, Ryan's back? Because it's been so long since we heard Ryan's voice on here.
I do love Ryan. I live in his home, so he's great. But yes, I'm not me. So if you were here to listen for Ryan, I'm sorry to disappoint. For those of you who don't know me or didn't listen to my Enneagram 1 podcast, my name is Jesse White. Currently, I identify as queer, and there's been a process of getting to that point, but I'll share that in a minute. As kind of underneath that umbrella of queer, a few parts of my experience are gender incongruence and primary attraction to men, and then also demisexuality, which, for those of you who don't know, it falls under the asexual spectrum. And it's hard to like fully put into words, but essentially like a good summation of it is for individuals who are demisexual, they experience very little sexual attraction until there's a really like firm, solid foundation of emotional and relational connection with another human being. And then at that point, there may be some sexual desires that come in or are included. It's not always guaranteed to happen, but that's a big piece of demisexuality. It's like there's basically no sexual attraction, sexual desire towards anybody unless there's a really strong like relational stable foundation with
right
else.
Yeah, and I forget who it was. Someone else mentioned demisexuality at some point in this journey of going across the spectrum as we examine all the different sexualities represented in our community. And I forget who it was, but that's interesting. So would you say you don't, or it's very rare to experience like a super strong attraction, like when you just see an attractive human out in public somewhere and you have no idea who that person is, you have no idea who that guy is or anything about them? Like, like, would you say there's just like not like a spark, that little sizzly butterfly feeling, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I definitely would not say, at least not in the way that I've heard other people talk about it.
Yeah.
Like from, I guess, just a general experience of being a sexual being. So I've done a lot of like research, especially as I was kind of like working through trying to figure out like what even is this experience. And one of the things that I found really helpful as I was kind of doing research and kind of figuring out how this looks in my own life is realizing that there's like different ways that you can be attracted to people. And for most individuals, like you find someone attractive and that might encompass like a wide range of things. They're physically attractive. They may have emotional intelligence that's very attractive to you. There may be some aesthetic beauty that's not necessarily just like physical attractiveness, but like how they present themselves. And then of course, other things like personality and physical looks. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of break down attraction. But yeah, I can see and like appreciate the beauty
Sure.
of people, both men and women. Like I think people in general are very beautiful. It's really cool to be able to see a lot of just the variety of how humans are made, and the different ways that that we are beautiful as created beings. But that's usually where it stops for me. Like I'll see someone and I'll be like, oh, they're attractive, but that's about as far as it gets. I don't. It's not something where I'm like, oh man, I really want to get to know that person, or I like have like fantasies about them later.
I was gonna say, are you like not undressing them with your eyes or with your mind, or
I mean,
as much maybe as others?
It's maybe on occasion, but again, even with that, like it's something where this is kind of getting more into my own experience, but like I've never there's a lot of aspects of specifically the act of like sex, and some things that kind of go with that is very like extremely unappealing for me. There's a few aspects of that I know are also connected to some traumas I've experienced when I was younger, but I think ultimately like I've never found like sex or sexual acts to be appealing or desirable. And I think where a lot of people tend to get confused is like I am a very like touchy person. I enjoy physical touch. I like that form of connecting with people, especially people that I really value and trust. And I think for me, one of the ways that I've seen my demisexuality play out in my relationships is the closer bonds that I have with someone, the more open and willing I am to be like physically affectionate towards them.
Right.
And so a part of that is like a trust aspect, but there's other pieces too where like I may really connect with someone like on an intellectual level, but I don't really have much else beyond that with that person. And so I'm not just going to be like going up and being all like touchy-feely with them. But my friends I have like long-standing connections with, and people who have like been with me for long periods of time and know me inside and out, like those are individuals where I'm much more trusting of them and want to express like trust in the sense of being more physically affectionate. So that has had its ups and downs for sure. But it's also been, I think, a unique way for me to feel more freedom to like connect with people in ways that I think normally would maybe like where other people may have like more of a problem with it, either just like personally or maybe from like an intellectual standpoint. Just because like for me, there's like a lot of interactions that are often assigned culturally as being like sexual in nature. For me, I'm like, I don't understand why this thing is sexual, especially in terms of just like being physically affectionate.
Yeah.
But there's also on the flip side, like I have to recognize culturally, every little thing is seen as a sexual or romantic gesture. And so I have to be aware of that in how I interact. Because though it may not be something that I'm thinking about, the other person or other people may not be interpreting it that way.
Right.
And so there's often a lot of, I guess, like miscommunication or misreading of signals that can happen and has happened in situations that I've been involved in like that.
Yeah. You know, just sitting here listening to you speak, I see there is a lot of parallel between your story and your sexuality and mine, and I'm hoping to share mine at some point in this fun little series. Yeah, because I'm seeing a little bit of myself. I mean, the fun part about this position that I'm in is like I get to see a little bit of myself in everybody. So yeah, it's like going back to demisexuality or asexual, or it gets often abbreviated as ace for those that aren't familiar with the hip lingo. Ace. There's also aromantic, arrow, right?
Yes.
It goes by arrow. So is there one that's like the most comfortable, or does it all kind of feel like there's like you see a little bit of yourself in all of these words and all of these phrases or whatever? Like how has that journey been as far as, or does it matter to you to find a word that represents you well? I was curious about that.
Yeah, and I think for a while I was more keen on finding like a word that perfectly summed it up, but ultimately, like in that process, I was just like, nothing really perfectly describes my experience, and that was part of my process coming to even using the term queer. There's a lot of baggage, I think, associated with other like more cultural queer terms like gay or lesbian, stuff like that. People can and do make assumptions based off of that, whether intentional or not. But I think also for me, as I was kind of working through, it was almost at the same time actually, kind of realizing that I was demisexual, and then also processing like my experience of gender congruence too, that like gay just didn't quite fully fit because there were other aspects of my experience that didn't fit under the term gay or like SSA as well. And so queer is a little bit easier because it gave a little bit more umbrella to encompass more of my experience and give me more freedom to kind of explain that to people if I felt the need to.
Right.
And if not, then I could just leave it at I'm queer. And people are like, all right, cool. So that was kind of that was helpful for me to kind of move towards that. And Demi, I think it's actually been interesting like talking about this with people, because a lot of my friends understand queer, but then when I try to explain my experience of like demisexuality, that often is a harder experience for them to grasp, whether straight or not, because a majority of the populace like views things, especially in like Western culture, like so much of our culture is so overly sexualized in every way, shape, and form. And that's how people think and function and grew up. And trying to explain an experience that's not a focal point of my life or my being, I think is confusing for people. And so I often will leave that out of the conversation altogether because it is one where it's not always worth talking to people about. And it's honestly like, I feel like it's more for me. It can be helpful sometimes to talk to people about it, but usually it's something that like, I know this is part of my experience. I don't feel the need to share it with everyone. There are areas where it does have more direct impacts in my relationships. And so when it comes to having those conversations, like if I need to share like, hey, just so you know, I don't tend to have a lot of like very strong sexual feelings. So if that's something you're worried about, don't let that be a concern. But generally like it's more just for my own personal helpfulness, essentially.
How is that, like, I know we only have so much time, but like, what was your journey of like self-discovery of realizing that like, oh, like most people do have like, especially during puberty and growing up in early 20s, like having those super fiery sexual feelings when they see someone attractive, male or female, depending whether you're straight or gay or anywhere in between. Like, what was it like? Like, did it take a while to like piece that together, or did you know right away that something was different between you? Not even just being attracted to men, but just that component of demisexuality. I wanted to learn about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it definitely did take a while. I didn't come to that full realization until I think it was 2019 when I first started really like kind of parsing that out. And because there just wasn't a lot of conversation around the like asexuality and kind of breakdowns underneath the ace umbrella up until I want to say late 2010s probably is the most accurate time frame. So 2019 is when I started engaging and hearing more about those types of conversations. But I remember even when I was like young and going through puberty and being exposed to pornography, like what I found attractive and desirable about pornography was kind of like the stuff leading up to the act,
the deed,
the act of sex. And honestly, like once it moved into like sexual territory, I was like, it was immediate turn off, and I like didn't want anything to do with it. But the rest of it was like really, I guess, desirable and intriguing for me because I am a very like romantic person, and so I think there's ways where I feel freedom to express like the romantic side of me, like in my friendships, of being able to like do things that would traditionally be seen as like you would normally do this just in a dating setting. I'm like, I want to like, I love buying my friends gifts and writing them little like sweet notes and
that's an important distinction to make too, that you can't just combine asexual and aromantic. Those kind of get lumped together in these conversations sometimes, but you can be asexual and aromantic or not, or you could be one or the other. And so it's I think helpful just to recognize there's diversity within diversity. Certainly it kind of keeps trickling down.
Yeah. And I think that's where it gets really tricky is like, for most people, when it comes to attraction, especially like sexual attraction and romanticism, like they're often combined, which it's not bad. Like the romantic stuff is what helps kind of grow that attraction and desire of someone, which means you're going to want to have sex with them. And that's great, especially in like a dating and then going into like marriage setting. Of like you want to do things that keep that desire for that individual through good times and bad, and so I think there's some similarities for me, at least in my friendships, where like I'm not trying to sleep with my friends. That's not part of my desire.
That's good.
Yes, thank goodness.
All of Jesse's friends listening, you can take a big sigh of few, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, that's not something I want, both just personally and also because of my own beliefs. But there's aspects to my friendships where like I want to be very intentional and pursue them in a quote unquote romantic sense. Like it brings me a lot of joy to be able to like pursue my friends in ways that make them feel like loved and cared for and desired. And vice versa. I really appreciate it when people do that for me as well. And I think what can be hard there is those pursuits can be misinterpreted by the people around me. I think there can also be a lot of fear-based like distancing. And that's happened both on my end, especially before I'd been able to kind of like work through and process a lot of this. Like I assumed that a lot of these romantic feelings I was having were bad because I was told by our culture and society that was like sexual in nature, it was sinful, and the fact that I was like wanting to care for my guy friends specifically in these ways was not a correct thing. And so being able to kind of work that out was very important for me to be able to feel more freedom in my friendships. But I think also on the other side, either having people misinterpret it and think that I'm like coming on to them or using that as ways to try and take advantage of me and in other ways where they may like see it as like, oh, like he wants to I don't know,
some sort of manipulation is happening, or some sort of creepy plan is being unfolded, or
ulterior motives.
Yeah. I'm confident there are people listening, whether they identify as demi or ace or not, like that there's probably some relating to that, like not wanting to come off like you just want to be nice, and you have this attraction, for lack of a better word, to your male friends, whether they're also queer or not, but then you don't want that to be misinterpreted. So I'm sure lots of people can, I know I can resonate with that, that tension.
Yeah. And I think that can be true of like most experiences regardless, like, because even for people who do have like more of an innate sexual desire and want to have those good, healthy friendships, like that can still be a fear. I think it's more frustrating for me because like I know where I'm coming from, and I can voice that to people. But at the end of the day, like I can't control how they're interpreting or receiving that. And I also like, just realistically, people, like other people are probably more sexual than I am. And so like, there can also be a point where like those desires, like sex and the desire for sex, I know is a very powerful motive and driving force. It's not one that I experience often. And when I have experienced it in the rare moments where it comes up, like I know how much it clouds your focus. There's areas where like I have to be conscious of that and be aware of like how I interact, but also know like the level of relationship I have with the people around me, to be able to, again, like feel more freedom and have that trust and that security to know that like I can express my love and care for you and know that you understand where it's coming from. On my end. Hopefully it's not going to be misinterpreted.
Yeah. There's not some tangent goal or ulterior motive. That's a good phrase to put it. So you and I were talking before recording a little bit about, there's these YouTube videos out there about, cause I was curious too about learning about asexuality and cause I know I'm somewhere on the ace spectrum, on the spectrum of all the spectrums. There's so many spectrums.
There's a lot of spectrums.
Yeah. So I'm on this spectrum too. And so I wanted to learn about it because I was like, am I on the spectrum ? Cause I think I am, but I want to learn more about it, or I want to hear other ace people share their experiences. So I'll link this video in particular that I'm about to reference now, but there's a YouTube channel called Jubilee, and they have an ace spectrum. And so they brought like 7 or 8 people to this little video shoot, and they had all these lines laid out on the ground, and they basically said, do you agree or disagree, or strongly agree or somewhat agree, et cetera, with like all of these different prompts. And then they go to different parts of the room depending on if they agree or disagree or not. And so I wanted to just rattle off a few of these, and what I was going to do is read a few of the prompts that I wrote down. Yeah. And then this is not scientific at all because they just picked 7 random pieces. You cannot extrapolate this across the entire universe as far as all ace people, but it was just an interesting little experiment to bring these 7 or 8 people into the room and see how they responded. And I just would be curious if there's anything that I rattle off that you want to comment on or respond to, feel free. And if this is a total bust and you want to respond to nothing, you can say that. That's totally fine. So one of the questions was, do you experience attraction? And most of them somewhat agreed with that. And there actually is a demi guy that is on this particular video that I'm mentioning. And he mentioned that in particular, and he talks about that, about being demisexual. So most of them somewhat agreed that they do experience attraction, as they also identify as asexual. They asked about masturbation, and they asked if these people masturbate regularly, and most strongly disagreed, but some agreed, which was really interesting, because they described masturbation less in like a way to receive pleasure, more as like a chore to do, or something to just like cleanse the body or cleanse the system, kind of reset the week or whatever. It was more of a chore, I think, than a specifically pleasurable act. And so I found that interesting. Another question, do you feel invisible in the LGBT community? And most of them somewhat agreed. They talked about a sexually charged culture. And so it kind of, by that nature, not just in the LGBT community, but, the bigger culture as well, about feeling invisible. And so they talked about that. And then one of the last questions was, do you find sex repulsive? they use that word repulsive, which is a really strong word. That is not a light word.
Very intense word.
And that one was, I think, the most interesting one to me because they went all over the room on that one. And I think it was just because how do you interpret that word repulsive? And what does that mean? And what I found the most moving, I think, from that clip was somebody who started tearing up. They said this line, and so I don't know if you agree with this line or not because you're a different person, so you can comment on that if you want, among all the other things. But they said, I don't wish I could experience sex. There's just moments where I wish I wasn't asexual. And so there's this desire, not the desire for sex, but the desire more so for normalcy, this desire to fit in more, because there's this, like, this seems like this person is perfectly fine not desiring sex, or certainly not to the extent that the rest of the population seems to. But then there's this other side of it where it's like, but if I did, then I would be normal, and or I would fit in more. I would be less minority, basically. And so, so I found that just super moving. There were some tears in that because they talk about how, romantic and sexual attraction often go together. But what if it doesn't for somebody? And what do you do? What do you do with that? And so I find just this whole conversation super interesting because, again, I've talked about it with Alex. I've talked about it with Keegan, this concept of a minority within a minority. Like, is that something that you've thought about that applies to you? And feel free to reference any of those things that I brought up. But I just wanted to give a little spiel for that video. And I'll link that in the description.
Yeah, I definitely have in multiple, like, both queer circles, Christian or not, straight, the church even, like, I've seen that play out a lot where just because of the nature, again, of like how our culture is, like a lot of things get reduced to sex. And sometimes I think, especially in the church, it's kind of cloaked in the guise of like the marriage conversation, having kids, but like really what they're hinting at is the like kind of fulfilling your sexual desires and needs within marriage. And I think that has always been an area where I've struggled within this conversation of being demisexual, and then also, again, with my experience of gender congruence too, of the fact that we're created as sexual beings. Because the way I've thought about it and felt about it for as long as I can remember, honestly, is how much of an inconvenience it is. It's really annoying. I think it's funny that like there were people who were talking about masturbation as a chore, because that sometimes is how I felt about it. And there are a lot of like aspects to it where like when that does happen, like it's not really pleasurable. It's kind of, it feels like a chore. I honestly, like, just being very, very real, like I usually get a really bad headache when I do masturbate. And I think as I've been getting older, I've noticed it's been less and less of something that I even think about doing or want to do, because the like what I may get out of it in the sense of like pleasure is like very minimal compared to the rest of like the aftermath, for lack of a better term. And so that is a piece to it where it's like it sometimes can be a little alienating, because it's not something I think about. And that's part of a lot of conversations in circles like ours, where people are talking about like struggles with like sexual purity and desires for like being with a man, or even in like with a lot of my straight friends, like wanting to be married and have kids, which involves having sex. And I think there is like a beauty to it. Like there's a lot of there's a big part of that involves connection, and it builds like really intense bonds between people, which is also why like I feel very strongly about like not having, like for my friends who are not Christians, like I feel very strongly about not having casual sex. And I guess even for people who are, like there's there's a reason why it was meant to be between a man and a woman in the context of marriage, is because like it creates such a strong bond between individuals. And so, yeah, there's a lot of importance to it. But it's also not something I want. And so there's aspects of that where I have a hard time being involved in those conversations, which often leaves me feeling a little bit excluded sometimes. And I think also just for most people, it's unfathomable that I would be living a life that doesn't involve sexual desires. I've had so many people in, again, all areas of my life who will talk to me and they'll be like, wait, so you don't want to be in a relationship, you don't want to like have sex and all these things, have kids and whatnot. And there's an aspect to that where it is connected to like my choosing of celibacy, yes. But there's another piece to it where it's just like, I just don't have that desire. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are like, but what about this person? Like, do you find them attractive? Don't you want to date them? And
like usually, a real person or a celebrity or like
both?
Both. Yeah. How could you not want to have sex with everyone listening? Fill in the blank with your favorite hot celebrity.
Yeah, pretty much. And what I also find really funny is like most of my celebrity crushes are women.
Yeah.
So it's also like I have these crushes not usually on male celebrities, but female celebrities.
Right.
But it's all like purely for aesthetics. But anyway, like I've had so many friends who have like offered to try and like set me up with friends of theirs who are like gay Christians, sometimes side A Christians, or just maybe not Christians at all. And they're like, oh, we know this person. I think you would get along great with him. You should you should hit them up. I'm like, no. And part of that is, again, my own personal beliefs, but also like, even if it wasn't for that, like, it's just not a desire I have.
Yeah, I think it's really important to translate. It's like, yeah, of course you have your beliefs, I have my beliefs. We have our beliefs in this community about what sex is for, but then pretend like you weren't religious or spiritual at all. And then you still have desires or not. And what do you do with those desires or non-desires? And so I think that's another element of this conversation that I'm glad we're having, because that speaks to me as well. And I'll share more later. In our remaining time, Jesse, I don't know if you've talked a lot about the struggle. So I don't know if there's anything that you've left out about what's hard about the way you are, but then also the flip side of that, the blessings and how God might be using. And I think you actually have talked a little bit about that too, about like when you find safe people and they know that you're not trying to get anything out of them in some kind of a sinister way. So I think you've talked a little bit about both of those things, but just in these remaining minutes, just if there's anything that jumps out to you as far as a struggle and or a blessing in your sexuality, feel free to share that.
Yeah. I think going back to the struggle a little bit, and this is not for me specifically, but kind of referencing back to the video you were talking about, I do think where this conversation can be really difficult, especially in relationships, is if one person is on the ace spectrum. I think that can cause tension and difficulty in terms of connecting with their partner, with their spouse, sexually, because that's not as big of a desire. And so I think that can be a frustration in terms of what that person may have been alluding to, is like, not necessarily desiring sex more, but having not being on the ace spectrum, because that removes some of that tension, some of that difficulty relationally. And so I'm sure that may be a more common experience than people are talking about, especially within marriages. And I think that is often a difficult conversational topic to broach, of not feeling that desire maybe as strongly or at all as the other person. And I think that can and does probably lead to a lot of abuse in the home because of that, which is painful and difficult. And so I think being able to have better conversations around just like sexual desire in general is helpful for all people, because it even for people who are more sexual, like there's times where you're just tired, you have lower energy, you don't really want to have sex, you just want to go to bed, and being able to know those things about yourself is like really important. But I think also on the blessing side, one of the things that I found really helpful across the board is it's given me, I think in some ways, a little bit more clear-headedness about my relationships, because I think sometimes it can be easy for, especially like gay men, to be pursuing a friendship, pursuing an individual because they find them attractive, and so they want to kind of get as close as they can without actually maybe going all the way in terms of like side B circles or your other brothers. And for me, what I'm looking for is not necessarily like the physical beauty, the attractiveness, or the sexual appeal of my friendships, but more what I'm looking for is more like what can this person provide for me holistically as a person? How can they like support and uplift me and bless me in my life, and vice versa? Like what can I provide and contribute like in this friendship to bless and uplift and benefit and enrich their lives too? And so it allows me to go into pursuing friendships kind of with a blank slate almost. And there might be things that are easier for me to connect with, because we all have like preferences and things that are just like more natural draws to people. But I think it gives me a wider spectrum of people that I am prone to connecting with, because I'm looking past just their physical or their sexual appeal, and more at other aspects of attraction that are just as appealing, but often get kind of tossed aside a little bit in these conversations.
Absolutely. Well, that's so well said. It's always a joy connecting with you, Jesse. It's been fun to see you lately these last couple of months. Yes. I've enjoyed getting to reconnect. I hope to come back to the city of Oaks very soon. I wanted to say this at the top. I totally forgot, but I'm glad I remembered right now. I woke up this morning and I had the best cup of coffee from Pine State.
Oh, no. Tom, how could you do this to me?
I had the best cup of coffee.
Oh, no.
This joke is only working for 3 people listening right now, but I don't even care.
Okay.
Jesse has thoughts about coffee. Let's just say
I do have many thoughts, and this will be my final recording with Tom, and this will conclude our friendship. Thank you.
But the good news is, before I leave town tomorrow morning, I'm going to go get some coffee,
better coffee
from potentially a better place. My mind is.
Oh, it's not potential.
My mind is open.
It is a better place. Don't worry.
All right. We shall soon see. Maybe we'll do a little follow-up podcast after the coffee incident, and we'll see what the verdict is.
Give a little update on your next ConvoCast or YOBcast, whichever one happens first.
Oh, so much fun. This podcast, by the way, not sponsored by Pine State. I need to make sure I verbalize that.
But it could be sponsored by Jubala.
Okay. We'll see what happens. Jesse, thank you for sharing some story. I feel like we could talk for such a long time about the way that you are, the way that I am, the way that we all are in this community. But it's always fun to get little snapshots and deeper dives along the way. So,
yes.
Thanks for anyone that's listening and this conversation resonates in any way. Go to our podcast episode page, yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Go click the ConvoCast link and find Jesse's little episode. Just anything about asexuality, demisexuality, romance, friendship, any of the topics we talked about. however you identify or don't know how to identify, feel free to comment and share some of your story. I'd love to hear, what anyone listening has to say or respond to. It's always fun to hear from y'all. The series is gold, I think. It just keeps growing and unfolding, and there's so many more stories to still find and uncover. So we still have a few more of these episodes this summer to come as we continue spanning the spectrum of sexuality in our community. So I'm looking forward to finding the rest of those stories. And then once we find those, we've covered it all. There's no more variety.
Yeah, you fixed everything.
We named everyone. Yeah, no, that's the cool thing about the series I'm learning. It's like, oh my gosh, it's actually way more diverse than even I initially thought. And I've been in this world for however many years, if not decades at this point. So it's been cool to be able to just see how we're all so different, so similar, but so sort of different. So thanks, Jesse. It's so much fun to record in person too. And I look forward to hopefully more in-person recordings in this beautiful city, full of amazing coffee across the spectrum as well. Well, I'll just leave it at that. And we'll leave it at that. Bye, Jesse, and bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.